My name is Jessica Geib, and the book that I chose is To Sleep with the Angels, The Story of a Fire by David Cowan and John Kunster. Both authors decided to write about this topic because they wanted to give a voice to those who grieved. David Cowan grew up in the neighborhood that Our Lady of the Angels School was located in the west side of Chicago. He was a former firefighter who was fired after 7 years on the force for starting a fire in a local church in the neighborhood of Chicago. He pled guilty and served 3 years in jail for arson. John Kunster was the editor of a publishing company and also a former columnist for the Chicago Daily News. Our Lady of the Angels Catholic Church and School was originally built in 1910, however several renovations had taken place. Located in west side of Chicago, it was in the middle of an Italian middle-class neighborhood. Upstairs of the school housed 6 classrooms. Those classrooms encased 329 children and 5 nuns. As you can see, there was much overcrowding in the school. Our Lady of the Angels housed 1,600 students total at the time of the fire. December 1st, 1958 would end very tragically. At approximately 2 to 2:20, the exact time is unknown, a fire began in the rear stairwell. The fire burned for at least 20 minutes before it was detected. As you can see in the red boxes are the number of fatalities in each room. Also note the area that the roof had collapsed in. Room 207 had a fire escape, however you can see right there, and the door was locked. A total of 95 children and 3 nuns, and scores were injured during this tragic fire. The fire spread very quickly. Students started to report that they smelled smoke and started noticing a light gray smoke in the air. Some students on the lower levels were evacuated. However, the teacher who pulled the alarm the first time, the alarm didn't end up going off. She came back after she took her class to safety and pulled it a second time. This lapse in time was one of the reasons there were so many fatalities. While the fire was burning, superheated gases were growing up into an open pipe up into the ceiling and walls without anyone's knowledge. Those superheater gases were the reason that the internal walls and ceiling of the second floor were already disintegrating before anyone even knew of the fire. Although the fire department responded within 4 minutes of the first call, many of the ladders that they brought were too short to reach the second-story windows. The rooms began to fill quickly with thick smoke and flames, and the children began to jump or were pushed out of the windows. Reports of injuries as well as fatalities from those jumping began to litter the ground. More fire departments began to arrive, and a large crowd was formed. There were reports of burnt children as well as children on fire jumping out of the windows onto the street. It was truly a horrific scene. Firefighter reported pulling children out of a burning window right before the firewall sparked up, igniting those who were still left behind. One of the ledges was too high in the 4th grade classroom, and most of the children were unable to climb out and jump from the window. They were told to pray. Thick smoke had drawn up from a roll of tar paper left in the hallway. Those injured, as they jumped, were dragged out of the way and moved to the side of the road so that the next jumpers would not land on them. The image on the left became very iconic. John Jawowski, the young boy pictured, was only 10 years old. The one on the right, you could see the squad cars as they were lined up to transport patients to 5 different hospitals. When the fire was eventually put out, all that remained was a charred shell. The firefighters then had the terrible job of having to bring out the many bodies that were left behind. They reported that many of them were falling apart because they had disintegrated so terribly. Pictured here is the stairwell where they believe the fire started. The official cause of the fire was never determined. However, 3 years later, a boy confessed that he had started the fire. Although never convicted, many factors were against him. He had a known history of arson, he was a student at the school at the time, and he was able to detail draw the bottom of the staircase where the fire had begun. One of the hardest parts to accept was that Our Lady of the Angels School had just weeks before passed a routine fire department safety check. The school had been grandfathered in 1949 standards, even though it was built so early on. Many of the schools of Chicago of that day were grandfathered in under this clause. They also did practice fire safety drills, although those drills were no help the day of the fire. The night of the fire, many parents were still searching for their children. They lined the bodies side by side in the morgue to help the people try to identify their loved ones. It ended up being a mob scene. Most parents chose to have a private funeral for their children. However, 27 of them did a mass celebration where over 7,000 were gathered. The injured children recovered in the hospital, while others were shipped off to schools all around the area. Our Lady of the Angels was demolished and rebuilt in 1960 with all of the most up-to-date fire codes. Soon after, many families moved and the neighborhood was never the same again. There were many reasons that the fire was so horrendous at Our Lady of the Angels. The first being that in 1958, many of the fire technology that we have today didn't exist yet. The school had one fire escape and no fire alarm with a direct connection to the fire department. There were known to be 15 layers of old paint and several layers of flammable wax on the floors. The school was not outfitted with a sprinkler system, and there was no class size limits. The old roof did not allow for flames to poke through and fight through the top. Also, another factor to note was that at the time, not have the masks that they can wear to protect themselves. Not only in Chicago, but the entire country was outraged by the loss of children. A committee was formed that enabled several new fire codes. These included amped-up fire drills for schools, having an alarm box connected to the fire department, amendments of old building code, installing fire barrier doors at all landings, revised occupancy to include 20 square feet per child. They created an Illinois Life Schools, whereas thousands of schools throughout the city were giving funds to update their current situations. Over 16,500 schools nationwide reported that changes were made. Another issue that was addressed was the post-traumatic stress disorder of the responders and the children who suffered during this fire. It was common practice in those days not to speak about horrible things that happened, whereas we learn now it is important to participate in group therapy sessions and other counseling in order to heal from such devastating circumstances. The authors of this book take individual stories, individual room stories, interviews from doctors, firefighters, clergy members, children, and parents to create what I have found through my research to be a very accurate description of the event. There are a few videos with actual footage available to view on YouTube, although they are very graphic. What I liked about this book was that the author allowed the reader to draw their own conclusion as to the cause of the fire. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.